Hi guys, welcome to Chapter 22, Part 2. We're now going to take a look at artificial and natural selection as well as adaptations. So to get started, let's pick up talking about Darwin's thoughts on artificial selection. So Darwin noted that humans have modified other species by selecting and breeding individuals with desired traits, as a process called artificial selection. Darwin then described 4 observations of nature, and from these he drew 2 inferences. Alright, observation 1, members of a population often vary greatly in their traits. What this picture is showing, what this photograph is showing, is how variety within a population is, the variation is extent as the heritability, as the chances that those traits can be inherited. To the extent that these different colors and banding patterns in the snail population can be inherited is the extent to which it can be acted on by natural selection. So the first thing that he observed is that members of your population often vary greatly. So all these snails are in the same population, however they do vary greatly in their appearance. Okay. Observation number 2, traits are inherited from parent to offspring. Observation number 3, all species are capable of producing more offspring than the environment can support. Observation number 4, overproduction leads to competition for food and other resources. So individuals best adapted to their environment will be the ones that are able to survive and reproduce. Alright. Descent with modification, these are where he pulled in his theory on descent with modification and came up with these inferences based on his observations. So individuals whose inherited traits give them a higher probability of surviving and reproducing in a given environment tend to leave more offspring than other individuals. So the more adapt they are to surviving to reproductive age, the more likely they are to leave more offspring than the not quite as fit individual that won't make it as far into their reproductive years. Inference number 2, he found that the unequal ability of individuals to survive and reproduce will lead to the accumulation of favorable traits in the population over generations. So those unfavorable traits that hinder a population or hinder an individual from being able to survive to reproductive years will slowly be replaced by desirable traits, as the desirable traits that are carried by those that make it to their reproductive years are the ones that are passed on. Okay? Pretty straightforward there. Darwin was influenced in his thinking by Thomas Malthus, who noted the potential for human population to increase faster than food supplies and other resources. If some heritable traits are advantageous, these will accumulate in the population, and this will increase the frequency of individuals with those adaptations. This process explains the match between organisms and their environment. So if an organism is not suited to that environment, it will not survive and it will not thrive in that environment. If the organism is suited to their environment, the better chance they have to survive in reproductive years, the better chance they will have to not only survive but thrive. Okay? So a summary of natural selection, it is, first and foremost, as you remember, survival of the fittest. Individuals that have those heritable adaptive characteristics to survive and reproduce at a higher rate than other individuals, they're the ones that are going to be able to survive to reproduce. The less fit individuals with the not so desirable traits will be the ones that do not make it to reproductive years. Okay? Natural selection increases the adaptation of organisms to their environment over time. So if only the traits that help that organism survive in their environment are the ones making it into the gene pool, if only those that carry those traits that help them survive are the ones that are making it to reproduce, then those are the traits that will be passed on. So over time, an accumulation of those favorable traits will lead to an increase in the adaptations of that organism to their environment. Alright, and speciation, If an environment changes over time, natural selection may result in adaptation to these new conditions and may give rise to new species. Okay? Same thing with how the organism adapts adaptations to help better suit its environment. If the environment changes, those adaptations to your new conditions. Predation and coloration in guppies. Alright, this scientific inquiry. This is on 460 is your page number if you want to look at the inquiry here. John Endler has studied the effects of predators on wild guppy populations. The brightly colored males are more attractive to females. However, brightly colored males are also more vulnerable to predation because they are less likely to be able to blend to their surroundings. So they are more noticeable by predators as well as their females. Alright? Guppy populations in pools with fewer predators had more brightly colored males. So the less predators there were around, the more brightly colored the males would be. The more predators, the less brightly colored, because those males wanted to be able to make it to reproduce and not be dinner for a predator. Okay? This is just showing their experiment. The predator that they added to their pool or their pond was a killifish that preys mainly on juvenile guppies, which do not express color genes yet. Alright, the guppies, they put in adult males that have brighter color than those in pike cichlid pools. Alright, they did the experimental transplant of guppies. Alright, the pools with the killifish but no guppies prior to the transplant. And then in this third pond, their predator was a pike. Alright, it preys mainly on adult guppies. The guppies were adult males that are more drab in color than those in the killifish pools. Okay, results that they found: areas of colored spots, source of the population versus the transplanted population. What these results show is that after they allow 15 generations, so after 15 generations, the number and total area of colored spots on male guppies in the transplanted population had increased compared to those of males in the source population. So the pond or the pool that they took them from versus where they put them into a pool that had no prior guppies, okay, that guppy population rose, okay, and so they were able to conclude that the changes in predator resulted in different variations, brighter color patterns being favored in the transplanted population over a relatively short time, an observable evolutionary change that occurred in this population. So because the pool that they pulled the guppies from had killifish that preyed on juvenile guppies, if they transplanted adult males that were brightly colored into the pool with the killifish, there were more brightly colored males able to survive because the killifish preys on juveniles versus the ones that were in the pike pool that preys mainly on adult guppies, and their guppies were mainly drab in color versus those that were put in the killifish pools. Okay, it was drab in color because that predator in that pool was looking for that brightly colored guppy to help identify it as its prey. Okay? So it was advantageous based on what predator was present for the adult guppy to either be more drab or more brightly colored. Alright? This discusses the results a little further. So Endler transferred brightly colored guppies with few predators to a pool with many predators. As predicted over time, the population became less brightly colored. He also transferred drab-colored guppies that had a lot of predators to a pool with few predators. As predicted over time, the population became more brightly colored. So you increase the predators, they get less brightly colored. You decrease the predators, they become brighter colors. Okay? Alright, directional natural selection, the evolution of drug-resistant HIV. Alright, the use of drugs to combat HIV selects for viruses resistant to these drugs. The HIV virus uses the enzyme reverse transcriptase to make a DNA version of its own RNA genome. The drug 3TC is designed to interfere and cause errors in the manufacture of DNA from the virus. Some individual HIV viruses have a variation that allows them to produce DNA without errors. These viruses have greater reproductive success. The population of HIV viruses has therefore developed a resistance to 3TC. So, in order to survive, the virus has adapted the way that it recreates its DNA so that even in the presence of the drug 3TC that is supposed to cause errors, it's now been able to develop a resistance to that 3TC so it won't cause errors even though it's in the presence of that drug. Okay? And that's another reason why your doctors tell you if you're prescribed an antibiotic that you take all of it and not a little here and a little there, because if you overuse and overprescribe antibiotics, whatever you're trying to treat with those antibiotics will develop a resistance to the antibiotic, and you have to go to a stronger antibiotic, and so on and so forth. Okay? I'm sorry. The ability of bacteria and viruses to evolve rapidly poses a challenge to our society. Natural selection does not create new traits. It edits or selects for traits that are already present in the population. So your local environment will determine which traits will be selected for or selected against in any specific population. What this figure is showing on page 462 is a fossil evidence of change over time. Alright. These fossils are just a few in a series discovered in the Latham Shale bed, which was deposited between 513 and 512 million years ago. The sequence shows change over time in the location and angle of the spines of the head shield, here marked by the red dots here, of these organisms. Okay? So they're able to, based on the depth of these different fossils, they're able to observe the different adaptations based on time period. The deeper the depth, the further back in time this organism lives. So they're able to see how it modified and changed to adapt to its surroundings. Okay? Alright? Paleontologists remember that they study fossils of possible transitional forms. Alright? Some whale ancestors are shown here. This is also in 562. It's showing the transition to life in the sea. The hypothesis that whales and other cetaceans evolved from terrestrial organisms predicts that these ancestors were four-legged. Indeed, paleontologists have unearthed fossils of extinct cetaceans that have hind limbs, including the 4 species whose skeletons are depicted here. Alright, note they are not drawn to scale. Additional fossils show that Pakicetus and Rhodocetus had a type of ankle bone that is otherwise unique to a group of land mammals that includes pigs, hippos, cows, camels, and deer, called an undulate. Alright, the similarity strongly suggests that cetaceans are most closely related to this group of land mammals. So, going through change over time, adapting to sea life, they go from having 4 limbs to those 4 limbs modifying from terrestrial to aquatic, predominantly aquatic, they could still walk on land, to fully aquatic, they no longer have those back legs, and then now to the most recent whale ancestor that is fully aquatic. Okay? Notice how their pelvis changes shape and angle as they become more adapt to life at sea. Okay? Anatomical and molecular homologies. Homology is a similarity resulting from common ancestry. Homologous structures are anatomical resemblances that represent variations on a structural theme present in a common ancestor. Okay, here are some homologous structures talking about mammalian forelimbs. So even though they have become adapted for different functions, the forelimbs of all mammals are constructed from the same basic skeletal elements. One large bone, which is represented here in purple, attached to two smaller bones, orange and tan, that are attached to several small bones that are represented in gold, attached to several metacarpals, which are green, that are attached to approximately 5 digits or phalanges that are in blue. So while they are structured slightly differently and used in slightly different manners, all of these different mammalian forearms still show very similar structure overall components. Okay. Comparative embryology reveals anatomic homologies that are not visible in the adult organisms. So some of these things, like these pharyngeal pouches and the postanal tail, is noticeable in the chick embryo and the human embryo. However, in adults, we have lost this tail, and these pharyngeal pouches, so they are no longer noticeable in the adult version of the organism where they were in the embryo. Okay? This picture is on 463 if you want to analyze it any further. Alright? So at some stage in their embryonic development, all vertebrates have a tail located posterior to the anus, referred to as the postanal tail, as well as pharyngeal or throat pouches. Descent from a common ancestor can explain such similarities. So you can link these to a common ancestor between different types of mammals. Okay? Different types of embryos, not just mammals. Alright? Vestigial structures are remnants of features that used to serve an important function in the organism's ancestors. Alright, so examples of homology at the molecular level are genes shared among organisms inherited from a common ancestor. So homologies and tree thinking. Alright, the Darwinian concept of an evolutionary tree of life can explain homologies. Evolutionary trees are hypotheses about the relationships among different groups. Evolutionary trees can be made using different types of data, for example, anatomical and DNA sequence data. Okay, here's showing a evolutionary tree looking at these branch points show your common ancestors, looking at different features and how they separate these different organisms and where they were branched off, where they had the most recent common ancestor. Okay. This is for tetrapods. Tetra meaning four, tetrapods. Alright. The lungfish is based on anatomical and DNA sequence data. Purple bars indicate the origin of the important homologies, each of which evolved only once. Birds are nearest within and evolved from reptiles, hence the group of organisms called reptiles technically includes birds. Okay? So your reptiles and your ostriches are close living relatives. Okay? This is your most common ancestor between a hawk and other birds and lungfish. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Convergent evolution is the evolution of similar or analogous features in distantly related groups. Analogous traits arise when groups independently adapt to similar environments in similar ways. So they do not share a common ancestor, they share a common location, a common environment, and they adapt to that environment the same way, or similar ways. So example would be a sugar glider and a flying squirrel. Alright, the sugar glider is a marsupial mammal that evolved in isolation on the island continent of Australia. Although sugar gliders superficially resemble the flying squirrels of North America, the ability to glide through the air evolved independently in these two distantly related groups of mammals. So they share no common ancestor because they evolved completely independently of each other, but they do share common features based on a need in their environment. Okay? Biogeography. Darwin's observations of biogeography, the geographic distribution of species, formed an important part of his theory of evolution. Islands have many endemic species that are found only in that part of the world, nowhere else. Darwin postulated that endemic species are often closely related to species on the nearest mainland or island. Earth's continents were formerly united in a large single continent called Pangaea, the supercontinent, but have since separated by continental drift. An understanding of continent movement and modern distribution of species allows us to predict when and where different groups have evolved. Alright, so looking at Darwin's opinion of natural selection, just to review this for you real quick, individuals in a population vary in their heritable characteristics, and your organisms produce more offspring than the environment can support. So from those observations, Darwin inferred that individuals are well suited to their environment and they tend to leave more offspring than other individuals. However, over time, favorable traits will accumulate in the population. Alright. Ignore this slide, please. Alright, these are the things that you should know. Make sure that you can discuss these different topics here. If you have any questions, please let me know. Most of this is pretty straightforward. Make sure you understand how to look at an evolutionary tree. I think that is everything. Please make sure you answer your checkpoint questions. Have a good day. Bye, guys.